And I think for the sake of time, we've got one panelist who need to be leaving very soon. So I think I'll just dive straight into the questions. And also, I think let me just then say good afternoon. And then to those who are joining us from different time zones, we see you, Sanmonani. All right, so I'm going to start with Ed. I'm just going to ask 2 questions, and hopefully that will cover you if you're going to need to leave. So the first question is, sustainability has been described in different ways today. Like it has to be environmentally sound, it must be economically feasible, it must be socially equitable. Now, in your library, what does it look like? What is it to you? So that is the first part of the question. Then the second question that I think is critical for you to respond to before you leave is, how involved is your team in determining the sustainability plans of your library and advocating for sustainability in terms of your processes and your policies? Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. Hello everyone, it's a privilege to be with you. I'm afraid I am the person who needs to leave in about 45 minutes. So I have to collect my son from school, and that's a hard deadline that I can't miss. So thank you very much for the invitation. So I was very pleased to catch the end of the last session and hear about the themes that were emerging, as you say, all of these different aspects of sustainability as they're articulated by the UN, but also manifest. So for us here at the University of Bristol, right across our strategic plan. So if you look at the way that the University of Bristol says it will conduct its education, its research, its engagement with its different communities, sustainability is a thread that weaves right the way through those. And so for the library, that's very much the same. In the way that we support the education, the research, and the civic mission of our institution, we have to consider the ways in which we pursue sustainability in all of its different ways. So for us, that starts very much with our values and in an ethical stance. The position of our university is that we must be sustainable in the way that we conduct all of our practice, all of our business, all of our engagement. So first and foremost for us, sustainability is an ethical position that we choose consciously to take and have to then develop ways that we take forward our practice for our libraries in our professional practice, but also the ways that we support across these different areas of the institution. So for us in education, it means that we support the ways that the university seeks to embed sustainability into its curriculum. So our university has set a goal for all of our students to have aspects of sustainability taught in their curriculum. It then means the ways that we support the open educational activities of the institution. So the library is a champion and supporter of making the university's education as open as it can be. So in ways that we support sustainable education, we then seek to make that openly available, whether that is in the textbooks that are created, the content that we buy, the ways that we publish the university's research. And then finally in education, it's the way that we seek to embed our academic skills offer within the curriculum. So a lot of what the library does is support students in developing their academic practice. We heard about the importance of interdisciplinarity, and that is very much a space that the library occupies. We engage with courses, professional skills, academic skills right across the curriculum. So for us, it's the ways in which we support our community to navigate disciplines which are not necessarily their own, whether that's in the pursuit of particular sustainability goals or elsewhere in their education. In research then, it's how, again, we develop skills around open research, seeking to further academic integrity in research, but also broaden audiences who engage with the university. So that's very much about the ways that we pursue sustainability in the guise of inclusion within the practice of the university's research, thinking about the ways that the university can positively impact communities, can engage people in taking forward new areas of research, and then seeking to greaten the impact of the university in that way. And then finally for us, it's about the ways that we seek to broaden the engagement with local communities within the life of the university, whether that is increasing access to our physical spaces, whether it's trying to make our collections more open, or whether it's seeking to use culture as a ways of bridging into communities who have traditionally low rates of participation with the university. So for us, it goes right across from an ethical stance into areas of environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, but particularly around inclusion and partnerships. And then the final question was about team involvement. So absolutely, we take that ethical stance right the way through into how we develop our own plans. So we have a sustainability group within our library. It's something which is chaired by one of our heads of service, and it involves people from right across our teams. And this means people working on our collections, on our metadata, on our frontline services, with our students, with our researchers. They all have a voice in how we take forward our sustainability plans. And that means that it touches on areas of our buildings, the ways that we procure our content, the ways that we consider how we travel, and particularly how we advocate, whether that's within our local communities or more widely. So that's a brief snapshot of how it appears for us here in Bristol and also in our libraries.
Thank you so much for that detailed response to how you actually deal with issues of sustainability in your library. I'm then going to go to Rebekkah, and probably this question links to the responses which have been given by Ed already, where he's saying that sustainability is actually embedded in their practices. It's not some burden, some extra that they have to tick boxes on, but it's something that is a lived experience in terms of how they do everything. So my question to you then, Rebekkah, is, since morning people were talking about sustainability. It looks like this, it looks like that. People, planet, profit. What are the characteristics of a sustainable library? Is there anything like a truly sustainable library? So that's the first part. Then the second part is, what informs that understanding of what a sustainable library is? Is it some academic consensus, as some have alluded to? Is it experience, or is it your practices? Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So I think that just to give you a little background, part of my work is volunteer work and founding a group called the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. And we've been doing a lot of thinking on this over the past 8 years. Because as the Sustainable Development Goals were announced and released in the United States, they did not catch on. And we can talk about that at the bar after the conference of why. But we had to find a way to bring the library profession in the United States together to talk about sustainability and the overwhelming nature of climate change and how to address that. And as you well know, climate change is the grandest challenge of our generation. And the scope and scale of work that is necessary to do in this arena is unprecedented. And so as we start to talk about it, people feel very overwhelmed because it touches on almost every aspect of our life, if not every aspect of our life. And for many years, I would present at library conferences talking about greening libraries. And I felt like I would get a pat on the head and, oh, isn't that nice? It feels like a checklist that we'll just become green and everything will work out for us. But explaining the systemic nature of why we are where we are with climate change and how to move forward from a place of hope became a calling for us in our work. And so over the past 8 years, we've worked with over 100 libraries doing practical work in this area, trying to find a path forward in librarianship across all types of libraries, public libraries, academic libraries, and we work with school librarians as well. And what has emerged are 4 characteristics of what we call a sustainable library. And this is certainly in practice. We love getting feedback on this. I'd love to hear from folks and your reactions about this. But number one is that we have to be strong and authentic institutions that live our values out loud. Ed was an awesome speaker about how to do that you see it reflected in our policies, how we treat our workers, how we do procurement, what we choose to curate. All of the work that we do must reflect those values in nonverbal cues to start out with. So from the outside in, we must reflect those values. Second attribute would be a distinct and deliberate catalyst for social cohesion and civic participation. We need people up and out of their homes, working together, problem solving together, and having those soft entry points at libraries to just get to know your neighbors, just that basic building of community so that we can work together on the much larger challenges of our world must be part of the planning of how we carry out our work. And then the third and fourth attributes will sound very familiar to you. One is climate change mitigation. How do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and slow down the effects of climate change so they are no worse than they need to be? So thinking about our carbon footprint, Ed gave you a couple of great examples. When we're traveling, are we doing carbon offsets and being mindful? Are we reducing the carbon footprint of our buildings? There's all sorts of things we can be doing in this area. But concurrent to that, the fourth attribute must be adaptation. We must help our communities be ready for what is coming, because climate change is brutal. And as we think about the extended heat waves that will result in loss of life, which is just one example of climate change's impact, as we start to think about libraries as infrastructure, libraries as creating connectivity for people to understand how to adapt in the face of what is coming in whatever region of the world your library is located in, we must deliberately take action in that area. So we fully embrace the idea that every job is a climate job, which comes from Project Drawdown, which I'm sure was mentioned at the conference. If it hasn't been already, I just did. So there you go. But this is all informed to the second question asked by this idea of how do we change the mindset? It's not a checklist. It's not 17 goals. It's not the triple bottom line. It is how we think about the world and how we make decisions so that it respects the earth. It respects the people impacted by the choices that we make, and also just faces the realities of the economics that libraries are confronted with, while at the same time shifting towards a climate justice lens. So making sure the decisions that we are making are fair, are equitable, are actually from a justice-centered decision-making standpoint. So our goal is that mindset shift. We have a checklist of things you can do, but we really want people thinking on an everyday basis through this lens of the triple bottom line and trying to achieve these four attributes, because we feel they will scale regardless of type of library, size of library, type of community, or region of the world that you serve.
Thank you for that, Rebekkah. And I think this was also for people from public library systems, because she's coming from that space as well. Because there have been questions in the morning to say there's a lot of speakers who are talking to academic libraries, and some wanted to know, to say, from the public library perspective, what should be done to engage with the SDGs. And also, Kelvin, you are the next one. Kelvin also, I think, I'm sure is coming from public library system, the Library District Administrative Offices for Las Vegas, Clark County Library. The question then is, people have said that the SDGs, we need to reimagine them. How have you reimagined SDGs, or what approaches are you using to say, this is what we must do to become a sustainable library system? And then probably also you can then just throw into the program that you guys are actually doing or implementing that speaks to any of the three legs that have been spoken to, whether it's to do with the environment or social equity or the economic aspects of it.
Great, thank you. Good morning here from Las Vegas, and so happy to be here and participate, and certainly go behind my friend and colleague, Rebekkah. So I'll just kind of continue on. Here from Las Vegas, so of course we're in Nevada, have my library system is 25 libraries spanning 8,000 square miles. So that's my library system. And so when I think about how we approach it and how we've been approaching it, we've done it through our strategic initiatives. So our strategic planning back in 2021 was focused on several areas around sustainability, and that's around people, both internal and external. That's around places, not just our physical library locations, but how we expand our library presence outside of those buildings, working with one of the other initiatives, which is partnerships. So I'm glad that I caught the end of the last session as well, where partnerships was really being talked about. That's something that we've really increased the library presence over the last couple of years. And then there's the platform. So the technology aspects and how we use those in our community. We really focused on inviting and welcoming the community as something that's been talked about, right? Bringing the community in, but again, also reaching out. COVID really, as in everywhere, every place around the world, libraries, in particular, public libraries, people were not able to come into our buildings. So we had to adapt and we had to transform how we work with the community so that we can be a sustainable library. And so what I'll add in that comment is that a sustainable library, to me, is a viable and open library. First, that's the first thing that we have to do. And so the partnerships that we've been working on have expanded profits and nonprofits, industry, bringing in additional grant funding, for example. And I want to weave I'm going to answer both questions and weaving in and out. But one of the things that we just recently did was we are working to help bridge the digital divide. I know that was a conversation that was mentioned earlier. And we're currently working on a project to provide up to 150,000 people in our community access to our internet providers' hotspots in the community. Some of the other things that we're doing around the environment, of course, being in the desert, hard to grow fruits and vegetables. So we have hydroponics that we have in 17 of our libraries. So we've got these big hydroponics machines. We're growing pumpkins inside the library, basil, parsley, cilantro, marigolds. I can go on and on. And so that's a huge initiative for us that's taken off. And then we're also providing smaller hydroponics machines to the public, to our customers, so they can actually go home and actually grow lettuce, for example, feeding their family from a hydroponics machine that they borrowed from the library. That's one of the things that has really, I think, taken our library system to another level, is that we're now seen as a linchpin to the community and making sure that those gaps are being filled, whether it be around bridging the digital divide, whether it be around growing fruits and vegetables, whether it be around just our programming, and then focusing on inclusivity. So Ed was right on, Rebekkah as well, inviting the uninvited and making people welcome in the library system, both within our staffs as well as in the community. So I'll stop there. There's probably more, but that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks so much, Kelvin. I think we're going to pick up on some of the points that you have spoken to now in the next round of questions, because definitely there is room for you to provide a little bit of clarity on some of the points that you have raised. Then I'm going to ask my questions now to Lazarus. So my question, Lazarus, is that a lot has been said about libraries needing to be part of knowledge production systems, so that it's not just knowledge coming into our spaces, but we actually go out there and we embed ourselves within the systems of knowledge production. Now, my question then to you is that what can the library and information systems or sector do to facilitate knowledge production and knowledge sharing as well? Oh, sorry, you can't hear you. Maybe you are still muted. There's still no audio coming through.
Hello?
Yes, you are clear now.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, thank you, Program Director. And thank you, colleagues back home. I'm actually attending a conference in India here, where we were discussing about how libraries should be, generating knowledge and not just consumers of knowledge. And if I look back, I think we, in South Africa, we have really done well in terms of looking at things that we think as libraries we are likely to influence our academics, but our universities, in terms of the take-home or good buys that the libraries are putting in place in terms of the spaces and etc. So I'll zoom into areas that I'm very familiar with in terms of my work, both in the past as a repository manager at UJ, as well as my previous role at the University of Pretoria and my new portfolio here at the Wits University. So if I look at the context of knowledge production, I think people have not understood particularly the investment that libraries need to put in place in terms of ensuring that we produce some of the materials that we have in our spaces and provide them as our giveaway to our academics. So if I look at my new university, the University of Witwatersrand, we do have archives, we do have museums, we do have special collections that are sitting. And really, sometimes when you look or go into these spaces, you hardly find the modern students because they don't have the time to actually peruse and use these facilities. But what we then need is to invest in digital production or digitization of these collections so that we can then say we are producing knowledge. And this is just one aspect. If I look at the work that we have done at Wits in terms of the rock art that was digitized and is becoming one of the mainstream of historical knowledge in Africa, it's one aspect that if that content was not digitized, that knowledge would not be available across the globe. And as an aspect to my presentation here in India, when people saw the rock art digitization project that the Wits University did, they were quite amazed because they have similar attributes of historical arts, and it might not be rock art, but it might be artifacts that they've collected. As you know, New Delhi is an ancient city, but these things have not been digitized. So for them now to realize that in Africa, we are already stepping up the digitization or digitalization of some of these collections, they were quite amazed. And at the level at which we have actually upscaled the knowledge production as libraries. And that's one aspect. The second aspect is, I think libraries, we should start dreaming big. And like Kelvin has said, that why not put plants in the library, provide tomatoes to your students. In our libraries, if we look, why don't we have studios? Why don't we have multimedia facilities? And as you know, it's easier to talk and to record than to read and write. So if we provide such spaces in the library, they are going to, our students or our staff are going to be part of the creation of new knowledge, which is basically easy to do than to write and publish. So you will find this is the kind of area I think that we have not specialized as librarians. We need digital media specialists. We don't need colleagues that are coming from library schools only. We need various skills and in terms of putting the right people in these spaces. We need designers, we need journalists, we need all kinds of people that can enable the knowledge production to happen. One aspect, as I mentioned, is the issue of what we started when I was at UP. We worked with the Department of Humanities to actually, when we started the OJS system, and through the OJS project, we then brought in students to be part of the designing of the various journals that University of Pretoria is now publishing. I think within 2 years, they had managed to actually have 14 journals on their system, of which 7 of those journals now are DHET accredited journals. So you can see it's a workflow that they put in place that is allowing the library to be part of the knowledge generation rather than the consumer of literature or knowledge products as such.
Thank you, Lazarus, for that. I think one aspect that Lazarus has spoken to is sort of bridging the gap between students and staff members, because we've been speaking a lot about sustainability in terms of us as librarians, but if we understand sustainability that much and students do not have that same understanding, then there is a gap there. So when he's talking about bringing in students to participate with us in our projects and programs, then we are actually closing that gap so that all of us, we are on the same page in terms of our understanding of sustainability. I'm now going to John, and I was looking at IFLA library of the world map, and it showed that there are 2.8 million libraries in the world, and there are about 1.6 million full-time staff members. There are more than 500,000 volunteers. And there are so many buildings as well. So it's like, if you look at libraries across the world, it's like a small city, you know, in terms of the people, the operations that are happening there, the buildings and energy consumption. So my question then to you, John, is looking at that, those physical buildings, the supply chains, the physical products, what are publishers doing in terms of helping such kinds of spaces to become sustainable?
Thank you. I love being part of these events. I find it terribly inspirational, and I think what's really interesting is often we're presented sort of in the media with the sort of impact of climate change, but we lose this sense that there's a lot of good work happening already, and it's already weaving into lots of organizations. And I think from a sort of publisher's perspective, there's a lot of good work happening already across the whole industry. And I'm going to talk specifically about climate action and sort of double down on that particular aspect, and sort of commitments towards carbon net zero. So essentially removing our emissions, sort of decarbonizing our organizations. And this is important to talk about because we're all very entwined. And so often when people talk about things like carbon footprint, they focus heavily on buildings, you know, putting solar panels on organizations, but actually it's much broader than that. And we're all very sort of twisted up. And so one of the biggest things that sort of organizations can do, and sort of libraries, or we can all do, is be intentional in the choices that we make. So it sort of goes back to sort of what Rebekkah was saying about, you know, being mindful and having that sort of value set and asking the question, because often just asking the question has a sort of pretty major impact of just opening people's eyes, particularly when you're a customer buying something. And so one of the sort of major pieces is really sort of starting to look at the suppliers that you're sort of working with, or the partners that you're working with. And so for us at Wiley, like a figure that always amazes me is like half the world, or nearly half the world's sort of academic research flows through our platforms. And so if people want to reduce the sort of digital impact of research, then it's really important that sort of Wiley takes a sort of very active sort of part in driving towards that. And so when we look at that sort of library infrastructure, I think there's sort of probably 4 or 5 areas that I would really sort of hone in on. One is obviously the sort of traditional stuff around the physical infrastructure. And by that, I mean both the sort of buildings, but also the products, the physical products that you're buying in. So buying sort of books and sort of journals. There's a lot of work going on in the publishing industry thinking about low carbon products or even carbon labeling. So you may, when you buy something like a fridge or you travel, you might see the carbon footprint of that. And that's the sort of piece of work that we're starting to set industry standards so that people can start to potentially make choices and start to sort of actually view the sort of carbon impact of those physical products. Another aspect is the sort of partners that people choose to work with. I think increasingly, and we already see this in certain countries around the world and certain sort of big spenders. So the US government, the US federal government is the largest single spender in the world. And they're currently consulting on guidelines that essentially says they will only spend certain amounts of money with organizations that comply with, say, carbon net zero or their sort of overall climate plans. And so we'll start to see more and more of that. But libraries can start to set those parameters and start to say, we're only willing to work with you if you look like this. And that's going to become a really important part. And the other aspect I think is really interesting to consider is the digital footprint. So we all come with a sort of pretty sizable digital footprint. Often that's very unknown to us. We all have pictures stored in various cloud devices on various phones. We all have videos, PowerPoint slides. Data from research is scattered everywhere. And one of the things that I think increasingly we need to look at is how can we actively reduce that. So one of the things that we do in Wiley is we run sort of digital cleanup sessions with staff where we just get together and people delete all those old files or delete large PowerPoint files. And this is important. Research has shown that in the UK alone, the amount of unused data, sort of so-called dirty data, is the equivalent to 112,000 flights from the UK to Australia every year. And so it's just sitting there. We're just sort of generating emissions just in a very unmindful way. And that sort of comes back to that being mindful in the decisions we make. And the final piece is about, which we've sort of touched on, is about engaging our colleagues and sort of raising awareness. So in the publishing industry, we're very much focused on the sort of, we have a sort of model where we talk about known as ADCAR. So sort of we raise people's awareness, we raise the sort of desire to embrace the change, people's knowledge and ability, and then we reinforce. And it's really important that we take people on that journey. They understand what they can do to have an impact, why that's important, build that desire, help people have that sort of knowledge and ability, and then reinforce that on a regular basis. And I think just taking people on that journey and getting them to consider the fact that every small step is going to take us in the right direction. Everyone can do something, even if it's deleting that email, even if it's deleting that PowerPoint slide. Every small step is one step better in the direction that we've got to go. And I think, there's a load of really, really positive activity that happens across all of our industries. And I think we need that sort of continuation, we need that passion, and we need that reinforcement critically if we're to sort of gain more and more momentum over time.
Now, colleagues, who would think that deleting an email speaks to the SDGs? Deleting one email. He's talking about your digital footprint, isn't it? Because remember, I always say, no, I'm not dealing with paper anymore. All my things are in the cloud, but remember the cloud needs to be kept alive. It needs power. We're talking about servers, energy, cooling systems, and all of that. And he's saying small steps at a time. This is education. Delete an email, already you are speaking to sustainability, which also speaks to why somebody was saying, if you look at the matrix, it's all interconnected. You do something here, it affects another SDG, because everything is interconnected. All right, Ed is still with us. So, Ed, I'm not going to ask you any questions now, but I'll just say, just give us any thoughts that you have in terms of what others have said, so that you can then conclude, then you can be able to leave. Thanks.
Thank you, that's very kind. I was struck by the amount to which we touched on similar themes. It was really striking throughout, actually, the extent to which the importance of values and community is really at the heart of this. There was a point on my journey in this space where I realized, and I think we all come to this, that once you're aware of some of these issues, you can't look away. It's incumbent on all of us to take forward some form of engagement, even if, as John said, it's the small steps. It's the small steps that are always the ones that are easier to begin with, but over time and with more people involved actually lead to that big change. So it's how you navigate some of that paralysis, perhaps, that you find when you realize the scale of the issues. and it can seem very daunting. So I was very encouraged that we've all found many ways forward. I'm absolutely delighted to hear of the hydroponics that are on offer in Clark County, Las Vegas. That sounds incredible. And that is truly stretching for me how I have ever conceived this within a university context and within a library system. So to consider that sort of extent to which we can really start to live those values is really quite inspirational to me. Also, just to hear about the adaptation that this requires on a kind of continual basis. I think that was your final one, Rebekkah, that kind of centers all of this work that we're all doing, particularly as we move into the digital world. And then, of course, within that digital world, all sorts of issues then manifest. So in some senses, digital can be a way for us to take some action or make some progress, but actually then, of course, issues in the digital space then manifest as well. So just that cost of us being in the digital world. I don't remember some of the figures, but it's very easy just to sign on to digital calls, isn't it? But then, of course, you've got to consider the infrastructure that sits behind that, the cost of streaming video from my part of the world to your part of the world, to replicating it around. Is such an important balance then to hear Lazarus talking about the opportunities that come from digital to engage new audiences, to have global impact. So important. But then I think sort of just thinking the next step on some of this, thinking about this issue of digital inclusion and digital equality, we were really struck through the pandemic here in the UK about the extent of inequality that was laid bare in access to technology and access to infrastructure. It's so easy to assume that technology provides opportunity, but actually we really have to be clear about who has that opportunity and who doesn't. And sometimes that doesn't manifest as easily. In the physical world, you can see, well, who doesn't come into our spaces? Do our colleagues look the same as the people in the streets who maybe don't come in, those uninvited that Kelvin spoke about? But in the digital world, we start to see this pervasive set of infrastructures, which are far harder to scrutinize, whether that is access to scholarly publishing, which is very concentrated in the hands of privileged institutions, whether it's access to the products of that research for communities, whether it's the sort of AI tools that mediate that access, which we know have horrific bias in them and skewed based on the ways that our collections have been put together and the ways that these systems are built. For me, these are some of the new frontiers where librarians are needed more than ever to take that ethical stance and to really engage in these debates. And I think there are some really great signs and some really great starts, and to hear all of these perspectives from very different institutions and different corners of the world is really heartening and inspirational. So those would be my reflections, and thank you, colleagues. This has been really interesting.
Thank you so much, Ed, and it was great having you with us. So I think what I'm going to do then is, in the interest of time, I'm going to have Rebekkah speak to one aspect, and then we're going to see if we've got any questions, and then we'll still probably go back to the other panelists, or we'll then get them to answer some of those questions. So, Rebekkah, I just want you to talk to us about your approach of the triple bottom line, the TBL framework, in terms of how you look at sustainability. I'm talking of this from your American Library Association sort of a side of your profession. And also my question also is, this framework that you are saying that you are actually using, how has it helped you to reimagine sustainability? Has it helped you to change your posture or your priorities or the methods that you use to evaluate whether a library is sustainable or not?
The triple bottom line approach, which it really asks you to find balance amongst environmental stewardship, social equity, and economic feasibility. What it did for both our work here, which started in New York and now is national, it created a common vocabulary that was missing. We were using the word sustainability in a variety of different ways to talk about our funding, our facilities, our human ability to thrive in the world. And we needed to set some just pathways of how we talk about this as a profession. And we saw it really click when we started trying out this definition. So instead of using greening or environmentalism, the sustainability with a very clear definition of what we mean by that word, using this construct, which did get its start in the business world, which at first folks were a little concerned about, but it easily translates into the work that we do in libraries. And the very, I think, flexible thing about it is that it works for you to think about buying a product, building a building, seeing how a community is doing, thinking about the world at large. It really scales well. And that was one of the challenges, is that sometimes we talk about smaller rural libraries or public libraries versus academic libraries, well-funded libraries versus underfunded libraries, but we needed some universal language so we could get people together and do work faster. Because I think we all recognize we're not moving fast enough when it comes to climate change. The professors that spoke in the panel before us, I mean, talking about the report card of how we're doing on the SDGs, you can see we're not moving cohesively enough, fast enough. And who takes responsibility for that? At the end of the day, it has to be all of us. So using our professional association to ask each individual professional to take personal and professional responsibility on this topic, we had to create more relatable language. So I think this has actually gotten traction. It's been working for several years now. So in 2019, the American Library Association adopted sustainability as a core value of the profession using this definition, and it's completely changed the conversation. We're moving faster and faster thanks to this work. And as John pointed out, it takes all of us. So I think, this idea of empowerment, of just stepping into that space and figuring out how to do it, we've got to stop waiting for someone else to tell us what the path forward is. We've got to innovate and iterate on it and just go. And this creates the framework and I think guideposts for us to do excellent work. So hearing Kelvin talk about hydroponics in the desert, that's because he's an expert in what it takes to be successful in Las Vegas, right? And that's the other problem. We can't talk universally because climate change affects different areas of the world in different ways. So empowering ourselves to do problem solving locally has to also be part of the conversation. And again, this scales well to that because it's so flexible.
Thanks for that, Rebekkah. And I think this really tells you that we need to work together. And as she's saying, we need to have a common language. When I'm saying sustainability, are you understanding the same thing? People from, when UJ is saying sustainability, is it the same from UP and Wits and our public libraries? So I think this idea of having standards that speak to what you are doing is really important. And I think this speaks to what we can do as CHELSA and LIASA and many other national library associations. So I don't know if we can check if we've got any questions, then we can get the other panelists who haven't spoken to respond to those questions. Any questions from the floor? Okay, I see there's a question there. All right, at the back there, the gentleman with a cap.
Afternoon. Mine is going to, I just want to check because we have been talking about the SDGs and then how as the library need to make them being implementable by users of the library and academics. But the question that I need to raise even to everyone in this room and even to the panelists is that first, do we really understand what are those SDGs, we as librarians first? Second is that, do we have, as we talk about SDGs and trying to encourage researchers or students, do we have resources in our library that talk about SDGs? Or it's just another talk when we are gathering like this one, we talk about SDGs, but when we go to our library, we don't even have a single collection that talk to any SDG goal.
Okay, I think I'll give that to Kelvin to respond to, because you spoke a lot about the things that you are doing in your community, giving internet, the partnerships that you have, and it shows that there is an understanding of what SDGs are from the grassroots, as was said earlier, I think, by Professor Givens. Maybe you can respond to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach, and I answered this in one of the questions in the chat, is that what we have to recognize is that we as libraries, regardless of what type of library, are not in this alone. It's about the partnerships, right? That's the first thing that we have to like let go and not try to do it all ourselves. And that's the extent, right? It's the partnerships in the community. Even just this week, this week, yesterday, I was involved in a conversation around the economic development of the folks in our community, not just the businesses, but the employees. And the library, the public library, was at the table because, again, that's sustaining our economy, is making sure that we have the literacy rates up, that we have the college graduates, but understanding from researchers as well how how like COVID impacted our community. Rebekkah said it well. I think it's we're in different places in different spaces. I'm in the desert. I'm in Las Vegas. Our economy has primarily historically been based on hospitality, right, and gaming. Well, we know that that is something that's not necessarily sustainable. Right? So we now are involved in the library is with our partners with workforce development. So within my libraries, I have employment workforce development hubs in 5 of my libraries, focused on youth as well as adults. We also have recently put library resources in an organization that is helping recently incarcerated people returning to the community. We've got a library there, so we've got to figure out how to get through partnerships, right? And it's all going to be different based on where you are and who the partners are, the nonprofits as well as the for-profits as well.
Thank you for that.
If I could jump in to help answer that question, I think the answer the gentleman in the audience would get is going to be different from country to country, because I think there's different buy-in levels at the government and municipal level, depending on where you live in this world. So where I live in this world, municipalities and governments don't talk about the SDGs. Over on the West Coast of the United States in Los Angeles, they do. And so the awareness level in the library community, I think, is uneven. And so I think it's awesome that your conference is trying to help educate folks to think in these frameworks to help organize our efforts in a way that will actually have an impact.
That is very true, Rebekkah, and thank you for that. I'll come to you. Do you have anything online?
Yes,
then we'll go to the gentleman.
Okay, I think for the people in the room, there's just a comment from Lazarus. It says, SDGs, let's decolonize the classification system as libraries, especially African or third world libraries. And also for people in the room, Janice is saying to John, thank you, John, I just emptied my deleted folder.
Okay, so then we can take this question, and then I'll get one of the panelists to respond.
Okay, thank you. It's also a comment and follow up on the gentleman right there. So the SDG base foundation, the SDG come from the environmental laws. So SDGs are drivers of environmental laws. Just like in South Africa, we have master plans, we have national development goals or development plan, and we have mid-term review strategies framework that reflect on the policy to see how far we have come, where we are going. So the SDGs are drivers to measure the continuous improvement of the mechanisms that are put in place in various aspects. So the foundation of the common factor of the SDGs are environmental laws, which the SDGs are packaged nicely in a way that we are able to measure each KPIs based on development and sustainability of each and every sector based on the drivers and the mechanisms that were put in place as master frameworks and also as national development plan. So we understand that SDGs are implemented differently and they drive different notation on how we think of them. So in regards of our situation in terms of our librarians, I mean, SDGs reflect on from where we are to where we want to be and how are we getting there. So it speaks to how are we bridging the gap from where we are to where we want to be. So that will speak to the mechanisms that different scientists and different librarians or information systems or practitioners that come into play will apply them based on their know-how and the sum of knowledge that is currently known from where we are to where we want to be. So we need to understand the gaps that we need to fill in order to realize our applications and realize the objectives that we have fulfilled. So it's not a question, but it's more of a comment. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. Because actually, I think probably, I need, Lazarus, I'm sure you were listening to the last contribution from the gentleman who was talking. And I'm sure you also posted something about decolonizing the classification, our classification in the catalog. Maybe you can just add more to that. Very quickly, so that we will then have closing remarks from John.
Yes, thank you. I think my comment for those that followed our presentation at the OR23 conference in Cape Town, as libraries, I think besides the other initiatives that we are looking at, we should start looking at how do we ensure that the content that is created in the libraries by our own researchers in Africa actually explains or tag or index the SDGs as they are supposed to, as we are supposed to. One of the arguments that I was looking at when I mentioned at this conference was we always use the indexing terms of taxonomies that are developed somewhere else. And when you look in the current SDG taxonomy, is there anything that reflects about Africa? Is there anything that reflects about South Africa? So those are, I think, the things that I'm mentioning when we are saying, let's decolonize the taxonomy. So if we look, UJ, you are ranked as #1 in terms of SDG rankings in South Africa. What does it mean? And what did the library do to ensure that you are where you are? We might say maybe there is nothing that you have done. So what are you going to do for your university to maintain that ranking in terms of classifying the content that you are producing? Because that's the starting point for libraries. Let's not take the other mandate for other units in the university. They will do their part. But us as libraries, I think for me, the first thing that we should do is to ensure that what we classify, particularly in our repositories, both data and research outputs, the ones that we have power over, not the things that go to external publisher, the ones that we are actually collecting and curating. Let's make the best of the taxonomies that we are creating within the libraries.
Thank you, Lazarus. I'm sure Kelvin is asked to be excused and he's gone now, and we really appreciate the time that he took to be with us. So, John, just in a minute or two, any closing remarks from you, and then we can wrap up. Thank you.
I suppose I just have 3 points to say. One is that SDGs is a huge topic that covers everything. And so my sort of watchword in this space is focus. You know, pick something and just do it. Because what we see too often is that it goes very broad very quickly, and things, you know, and I see this sometimes at an industry level, things sometimes can end up as talking shops, and really the time for talking is sort of coming to a close and we need to take action. And I think what's really positive from today's session is you start to hear about things where people are actually taking specific actions. I think the other is evangelize. People are passionate about this. People often want leadership, want people to take sort of action. They want someone to sort of follow. So sort of, if you feel that sort of enthusiasm or you want to sort of take things forward, often, certainly I find this within my own organization. It's fantastic when you go and talk to people. They just want to be part of it. They want to engage. They want to feel like they're driving real impact in the world, and the SDGs provide a fabulous framework for doing that. And then the final bit is take action. Is that sort of like one step better? Everything has just be intentional, think about things that we can all do. Even like to Janice's point, emptying your email box every day will have an impact. It might be tiny, but if, 1 billion of us did it every day, it's going to roll up to something meaningful. So we all can take action, and we all need to sort of own it, to sort of Rebekkah's point, and sort of all sort of invest, because it may not be our future, but it's certainly our children's, our sort of nephews, our grandchildren's future at stake, and we have a sort of moral responsibility to leave the world, try and leave the world less badly off than we inherited it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, John. And he just added another P to the planet, people, profit, partnerships, passion. If we are passionate about it and we empower ourselves, then we will be able to make a change, even if it may be very small. So thank you so much, our panel members, for taking time to be with us and inspiring us with the work that you are doing in your libraries and in your communities. We really appreciate you taking the time.